the students. And when I talk about gender budgeting, I need to tell you a secret that when I joined NIPFP as an economist in 2000, on the first day of my appointment, the terms of reference given to me was to conduct gender budgeting in the context of India. So that time in 2000 August, this term was alien for most of us. And in the public finance corridors, in the power circles, talking about gender and budgets was such a tough deal that time. Because you can connect to it. When we talk about budget, we talk about deficits, expenditure, taxation, and little ahead, we talk about interest rates, inflation. But talking about gender in budget was very tough, those days. From there, the journey was tough. It was ups and downs. But over the years, gender budgeting or integrating gender into the budgetary policies have become a new normal. And now we have the space to deal with it. Now, a moment, think about the central bank. The central bank has not yet spoken about gender, integrating gender into the monetary policies. I have never heard a central bank governor speaking about integrating gender in monetary macro. So you can connect to an era, in 2000 in which no finance ministers were ever ready to speak about gender in budgets. So we have come a long way, but, miles to go before I sleep. So that's the way, gender budgeting is. It's a financial innovation. We cannot say no to a financial innovation. And what exactly is an innovation process? Like any other fiscal innovation, gender budgeting has to pass through many stages as a fiscal innovation. Like in the beginning, knowledge building or knowledge networking, that was very crucial. Because, gender budgeting, it's not a homogeneous concept. Each country interprets gender budgeting differently. So gender budgeting, integrating a gender lens into the budget, the beginning of the journey was to identify the specific models. The knowledge networking, that was very crucial. So once that was ready, the pioneering institute was NIPFP, where I work. And now we have to translate this public policy research into, what you call the implementation or a public policy perspective in our country. So how to translate the policy research to policy or public action into public policy? The important ingredient over there is institutions. Because institution is the core of everything. If institutions fail, we read in Asimov's book that when institutions fail, the nation fails. So institutional building was the second phase in the fiscal innovation process of gender budgeting. So knowledge building, model building, then come to the institutional mechanisms. Then once that is set, once the finance minister announced in the budget that next year onwards the country is leading gender budgeting in India, after that announcement, then came the need for capacity building. Because the sectoral ministries were not ready to incorporate a very new concept of gender budgeting into the sectoral ministries. So by mandate, by law, the budget called circular integrated gender budgeting as one of the, the financial laws in our country. What exactly is the budget circular? Any budget process begins with the called circular or the budget circular. So there, you have to mandate how the demand for grants has to be prepared by the individual ministries. And in that called circular, in the budget circular, a clause is integrated that the country has to do gender budgeting sectorally. And many of the issues in gender budget cut across sectors. So we need to have an intergovernmental mechanisms to talk about the issues which cut across sectors as well. So these institutional buildings were crucial in the second phase. And the third was capacity building, because state capacity is everything. And the fourth stage is accountability mechanisms. Because what we announce in the budget, that need not be actually translated into outcomes. Here the fiscal marksmanship is quite crucial. So what exactly is fiscal marksmanship? What we announce and what we realize. There should not be any gap in that process. Otherwise, we can announce many things for the welfare of women, but it is not backed up by proper allocations, then those are just promises and not getting translated into proper outcomes. So fiscal marksmanship is very crucial. Otherwise, the fiscal forecasting errors can happen, not only for gender, even for the macro fiscal parameters. This fiscal marksmanship is very crucial. So these are the 4 different stages. Now let's unpack what exactly has happened in the knowledge building process. In the knowledge building stage, the crucial question was how we can capture or how we can measure gender development in a country. So linking fiscal policy to gender outcomes, that is very crucial. That's a case we are building for integrating gender budgeting in the fiscal policy framework. So the crucial question came, how do you measure gender outcomes, how it can be linked to fiscal policies? Because those time the belief was that when economy grows in terms of the GDP or economic growth, that economic growth gets naturally translated into gender aware human development. But you can understand that that's not always the case. That trickle down from the growth process cannot happen every time, and we need to build in many conscious public policies which translate into better gender related outcomes. Now, if GDP is not a measurement of gender aware human development, what next? What we need to manipulate or maneuver? There, Human Development Index that was constructed on the basis of 3 important priorities, because human development is a huge set of choices. So from that set of choices, we need to prioritize and we need to say that these are the 3 important dimensions which is crucial to look into. And those dimensions were education, health and income. And education was proxied by gross enrollment ratio and the literacy rate till 2010, and from 2010 onwards, mean years of schooling was incorporated as the proxy for education. And this mean years of schooling, students can take a look into that wonderful paper by NBER, and it was written by Barrow and Lee. And there they constructed the mean years of schooling. It's actually the completion rates, because the moment we capture education process through enrollment, then the dropout rates are not getting captured. So we need to get a proxy which captures the completion rate, and the mean years of schooling was a better variable to capture the education. And when we talk about the stories related to the girls and boys, that disparity widens. So the gender neutral index, that was the human development index, but to incorporate the gender aware elements into that gender neutral human development, what base students can also take a look into the work by Amartya Sen and Sudhir Anand. They have constructed what is called equally distributed equivalent. It's like constructing a gender-sensitive equity indicator to measure gender outcomes. And this equally distributed equivalent is, suppose you are capturing the male and female components, the men and women, that components in the gender-neutral index of human development by taking out education, health. In the gender development index, it is not an aggregate level. You have to disintegrate using the harmonic mean. I know that you have the background of mathematics, so it's basically a harmonic mean by giving emphasis to the weightage, like the share of female and male in total population, and then you work out literacy rate, gross enrollment ratio, or for the health you have to work it out with life expectancy. So this is a way the gender neutral index human development gets translated into a gender sensitive equity indicator and a gender development index. So those details, if students are interested, you can talk to me one-to-one. Your ma'am will share with you my email address, or you can even follow me on Twitter. There I upload my papers and we can begin the journey. It's not the end of everything after my lecture. So students can take a note of my points and we can talk about it. Those who are interested, we can talk about it later. So in the innovation process, I mentioned knowledge building was very crucial. In the knowledge building stage, measurement is very crucial, and we try to quantify. And here the methodological question is, we need to quantify gender development. But I'm not saying that the qualitative methodologies are bad to capture gender outcome process, because qualitative methods means you go to village, listen to women, what exactly is their needs, to translate into gender-aware public expenditure decisions. So those stories, those compelling stories, the perspective of poor women by poor, or the perspective of poor by poor, those qualitative methodology is very crucial to understand what exactly is the revealed preferences of women to get integrated into budgeting. But we are not talking about a strict watertight compartment of methodology like quantitative or qualitative. Both are very crucial. That's why the methodology for gender budgeting has to be Q squared. It has to be qualitative and it has to be quantitative, because running millions of models and listening to a compelling story by women, when you compare that story coming out of women in the village, what exactly is her needs, that's worth running millions and millions of models and econometric regressions and all. So we need to capture both the qualitative aspects and the quantitative aspects when we talk about gender budgeting and gender outcomes. So these are related to the measurement issues and the methodological issues. So now comes the question, is fiscal policy and gender outcomes linked, or intra-household bargaining power and intra-household dynamics in the resource allocation alone matter for gender outcomes? It's not the public policy. No, research or empirical evidence have increasingly proved that, despite of the intra-household dynamics, public policy has got a role to play in translating, into better gender-aware human development outcomes. So what exactly is that public policy? Now, before getting into the policy design, we need to be aware of what exactly is the gender issues in the context of India. There are many. If I ask students, had I been there, we could have done an interactive roundtable. But let me tell you a few concerns we have. First, if you look at the life expectancy of women is greater than men. And if you look into any other indicators, you can understand that the indicators are skewed for women. Like, if you take literacy rate of men is greater than women. If you take anything for that matter other than life expectancy. And in this life expectancy, that it is the biological advantage given equal care and nutrition. But this biological advantage is also getting neutralized by gender discrimination. And that gender discrimination starts even before birth in India. Then gender discrimination starts even before birth. We cannot say that the legal fiat and the legislations will take into account those gender-related matters. Public policy, especially fiscal policy, has got an important role to play over there. And what exactly are the policies which we can frame? Of course, intergovernmental transfer mechanism is one of the important points we need to look into. What is intergovernmental transfer mechanism? In India, what holds our country together? It is the institutions. It is the fiscal federal institutions. There is an asymmetry in the revenue and the functions, because most of the important functions are assigned at the subnational levels, but many dynamic taxes or dynamic revenues are at the level of the center government. So there is vertical and horizontal imbalance that could create in the context of India. So we need to correct those vertical and horizontal inequalities or imbalances in the fiscal space. So how to tackle that vertical and horizontal inequalities? We need to design the cooperative federalism kind of model through informed fiscal transfers. And what exactly is a fiscal transfer? It can be conditional and it can be unconditional flow of funds or the devolution or the tax transfers from the center to the states. Now comes a question. Conditional transfer or unconditional transfer can better address the issues related to the gender outcomes. So, a group of economists believe that it is conditional transfer that is better because we design transfers for a specific purpose. Suppose gender aware human development. So, the transfers are designed exactly for that particular purpose. It is a specific purpose transfers to enhance the fiscal space at the subnational levels. But unconditional transfer is we are not designing a specific purpose to a transfer. It is like based on formula, a scientific formula. The tax transfer happens in the sense the finance commission. Students can take a look into the finance commission reports and how this transfer is designed. It is based on a scientific formula. And what exactly is that formula in the context of India? We have different criteria and their separate weights are given to those criteria like population, area. As per the terms of reference of the recent finance commissions, climate change is a part of finance commissions. So we have a proxy or a criterion related to climate change. And we have to integrate the distance of each of the states from the high per capita income state. So that is what is called the distance criterion based on the per capita income. So there are several indicators. So the debate was like, can we sensitize the scientific formula-based tax transfers by integrating gender as a criteria into the finance commission transfers? Because then it's a kind of transparency and accountability, because we are telling to those states which are not doing good in terms of the gender development that money speaks. So if your indicators are not good, based on that weightage given to the indicators related to gender aware human development, you may get less transfers. So that's a kind of integrating gender lens into the intergovernmental fiscal framework. And so far in India, indirectly a gender related component was integrated into the fiscal formula, but that direct variable on gender that's yet to come. But the research is moving in the right direction, and we hope that the 16th Finance Commission will take it quite seriously. And what exactly the 15th Finance Commission has done, population was a problem in the sense, in the 15th Finance Commission, they decided that they will use population of 2011 to integrate the concerns related to the neutral indicators. But the states which have controlled population from 1971, they protested that if you're incorporating the recent population, what will happen to our states? So you need to adjust for that. So the Finance Commission, 15th Finance Commission, integrated a gender-aware, TFR, total fertility rate, the demographic variable, into the formula to adjust for that problems happening from using the recent population data. So indirectly it's done, but the 16th Finance Commission, I hope they will integrate. But no Finance Commission has taken sex ratio at birth, which I mentioned, the discrimination that starts even before birth, into the formula-based fiscal transfers. So these are the ways in which the research is advancing. But look into another empirical evidence, research done by IFPRI, International Food Research Policy Institute. So their outcome, that was not exactly to the gender, but related to the poverty. And what was the conclusion? The mainstream spending by the government is crucial for better outcomes to reduce the poverty than you design specifically targeted programs for poor. What exactly that mean? You're designing infrastructure, you're increasing your spending on R&D. That's important for reducing the poverty, but not specifically designing programs for the poor. Like we have many flagship programs for poor, but those are not having adequate impact. But this research is controversial because poor men and women, they have strategic needs and practical needs. Practical needs, of course, it can be based on equality in processes. You base your public policies on equal opportunity or equality paradigm. So everything, men and women can come and access. Government doesn't discriminate. So prima facie, we see that the budget is gender neutral, public policy is gender neutral, men and women can come and access. But that's not gender budgeting because, had equality in the processes lead to equality in outcomes, India would have been different by this time, right? India is developing for whom? When a country develops, why a certain segment of population is kept vulnerable? When you look into the gender disaggregated benefit incidence analysis of the public service provisioning and public expenditure, why do you infer that there is an elite capture? Why the poor or a segment of population is not coming and accessing the public service provisioning in our country? So, equality in opportunities is a magic mantra. Then, the gender disaggregated benefit incidence analysis would have been different. But there is an elite capture. So, how to correct for it? So, to me, gender budgeting is about removing unfreedoms of men and women, girls and boys to come and access the resources equally. So how to remove the unfreedoms of the people? There are many entry barriers for the girls and boys to come and access and enjoy what's happening in our country, right? But if certain segment of girls and boys are not able to come, the distance they travel is, different than others, then we need to capture those stories and we need to bring them on board equally with others. So what exactly those policies to find out how we can remove these unfreedoms and to get girls and boys equally on board. And, we cannot keep the public policy should be based on leave nobody behind, that LNOB paradigm. That exactly is development. Otherwise, countries' GDP may grow, but you can see in the context of pandemic also, we have economic recovery, but that economic recovery is quite uneven. So gender budgeting is one of the powerful policy tools or the PFM tools to address those kind of, uneven recovery or to remove those unfreedoms. So there, the whole economy we need to see from the market economy where we go out and work that 8 hours and the unpaid care economy. Care economy in the sense 24 minus 8. If you look into the time use statistics, it's a new kind of technique to capture the primary survey. And our National Statistical Office has done a macro level time use survey. Students can take a look into the chronology of the time of men and women in all the states of India. That data is ready. It was published in 2020. So as per that chronology of the time, there is time poverty and women experience time poverty greater than men. And if the government thinks that the policies related to employer of last resort is a magic, and if you have lot of job guarantee programs that can lead to increasing in the women's labor force participation, that cannot happen unless we remove the constraints related to the care economy. So care economy infrastructure should be the complementary fiscal policies to address, issues, and then, the fastest and the smartest way to develop or to improve the GDP will be to increase the female labor force participation by enhancing the care economy infrastructure. Otherwise, you may have ELR policies, employer of last resort policies, but you need to understand that time poverty affects income poverty. So we have to deal with the time poverty, and the chronology of the time captured from the time use survey data is very crucial to understand that time poverty. So we need to deal with the elements of time poverty so that the fastest and smartest way to develop will be increasing the labor force participation of women. And that feminization hypothesis, right? Like when an economy develops, initially the female labor force participation decreases, but after a point of time it increases. So India has to experience that feminization. Our policies, public policy, need to be ready in terms of gender budgeting for that feminization. And students can do it econometrically through models also. It's kind of a link between your GDP and the labor force participation, and it's a contracting function. So the square term that gives you that whether that's operating or not, if your coefficient is significant, and you will understand that whether that contracting function, the square term, will give you that clue. Students can take a look into this in future when you learn the econometric models. It's very interesting. There are many methodologies, and some students may think, but I may be looking the gender budgeting question from a policy perspective and the qualitative analysis by talking to women in the village, and my methodology will be that I am comfortable with that, not the models, please. Such students, they will look into the questions from that perspective, and that's welcome. And some students, you are very comfortable with running a lot of mathematical models, and you're very comfortable with mathematics. So, the methodology those students may prefer will be quantitative. So they will enjoy the econometric modeling and all. But economics has space for all students, the students who enjoy qualitative research, the students who enjoy quantitative and econometric models. The economics, that beauty of the subject, the business of life, we can look into from many perspectives and many methodological point of view, and you will be very comfortable because you will be able to understand what suits you better, and you will take it ahead from through that path ahead. And there's space for everybody. So that's the case. And now comes the question, how to capture this care economy. I mentioned that it is statistically invisible. So imputing time to the work done in the care economy can be one method, or imputing price. But imputing price may be little tricky because, for instance, Nikita ma'am and myself, we may be, because the ensuring fuel and clean water home is a duty of women and girl children, right, in the villages. So Nikita ma'am and myself may go to the forest to collect the fuel load, and Nikita ma'am may be walking 2 hours, but I may be walking half an hour to collect the fuel load. The moment we researchers go and impute that price to that work done by me and Nikita ma'am, because, for example, both of us collected 1 quintal fuel load. The moment you impute price to it, the value of the work done by Nikita ma'am and myself will be equal. It's like 1 quintal fuel load, you value that. But the intensity of the effort, that can be captured only by the time use survey, because she walked 2 hours to get the fuel load, right? So this intensity of the effort cannot be captured to the pricing methodologies. So we can do the statistical invisibility, or removing the statistical invisibility of the care economy, but integrating that into the GDP, that's another story. Then this pricing mechanisms, lot of issues methodologically we need to sort out before we integrate the care economy into the GDP process. But we can always keep it as a satellite account. That's the way the climate change accounts or the green accounting is also done. So these are the different ways in which we need to look into the care economy aspects to get the care economy also on the board the moment we talk about gender budgeting. Otherwise, if gender budgeting is just getting confined to the market economy and the monetized segment of the economy, then the story is going to be partial. Now, against the COVID pandemic, we experienced that things are not okay, and women are bearing the brunt of, lockdown strategy or whatever we announced, because our country, how we responded to the crisis, what was our methodology through lockdown process. unlike Korea went for aggressive testing in the beginning, but this lockdown strategy that led to, irreversible economic disruptions, and the employment plummeted, the wage is coming down. So how to respond to that? Many countries designed economic stimulus packages, and in that economic stimulus packages, students can take a look into the RBI website and the Ministry of website. Take the Atmanirbhar package and put a gender lens over there. Can you find any deliberate attempts by the government to integrate gender lens into the economic stimulus packages they announced? If you take a look into those packages, of course, energy sector, in the energy infrastructure, we announced, excuse me, gender budgeting. That is providing clean fuel to the women in the low income households. A prima facie gender neutral Department of Petroleum coming up with a very gender sensitive program. That's welcome. But I heard that this Ujjwala program, which was a flagship program, that was rolled back in September 2020. It was quite linked to the calculus of consent or calculus of voting of people. Women voted back the government, in retrospect for their policies. And this linking, the last mileage, that Ujjwala program was quite a crucial determinant of that calculus of consent or the calculus of voting behavior of people, because we do vote the government back to power based on, in retrospect, the policies announced by the government. But now it is shocking that in the gender budget statement, why that Ujjwala, the energy infrastructure gender budgeting, why they rolled back? Maybe they will reintroduce it, but it has gone. Another major program announced in our country was look into, in the gender budgeting statement, was look into the case which I mentioned earlier, the discrimination of girl child that starts even before birth, that Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao, that program. And now, due to the convergence of different public expenditure schemes, in that umbrella scheme, that Beti Padhao, that component became, one of the components within that convergence package. And it is difficult to track the allocation and the promises of government when the public expenditure convergence happen by integrating many policies into one umbrella scheme. Convergence is of course crucial from the perspective of fiscal rules, but tracking, these components, that is getting tough. And what exactly is the fiscal rule? Against the COVID pandemic, we announced that in our country, we are going to relax the fiscal rules. Fiscal rules, that's global, everywhere that's there. For instance, in the European Union, the countries came together based on economic integration. And, then the European Central Bank was exogenous to each of the member countries. So they formulated the policies based on fiscal, because exchange rate policy was exogenous, monetary policy was exogenous. So fiscal policy was the predominant policy tool to address the human development issues. Then came the fiscal rules, and that is Maastricht Treaty. Like, your fiscal deficit to GDP ratio, you need to maintain to 3%. That means in the context of pandemic, when the revenues are not buoyant, when the taxes are not buoyant, you are compelled to do expenditure compression so that your deficit remain at that 3% of GDP level. But students, you need to have a rethinking about these fiscal rules. Globally, there is a rethinking. In the context of crisis, in the context of pandemic, we need to have that strict fiscal rule because revenues are not buoyant. So in order to maintain that, we need to do an expenditure compression, and expenditure compression can affect human development and growth recovery process. That's why in the last budget, from a position of strength, Nirmala Sitharaman, our finance minister, mentioned that don't fear deficit in the time of pandemic. You don't have to fear deficit. That's the articulation she made, and her deficits are now mounting, her debt is mounting, but high debt and high deficit is okay. The moment you can substantiate that through enhancing the infrastructure policies or decreasing the output gap. Output gap is the difference between your actual output and the potential output. And actual output is based on GDP. Potential output, again, we economists calculate it through filters or methodologies, like students can connect to it. You have a series. That series has cyclicality and a trend component. So potential means we take out that cyclicality of that business cycle and call the trend as your potential. But it is quite controversial because this potential output, as I mentioned earlier, it's only based on the systems of national accounts, that GDP calculation. But I mentioned the statistically invisible care economy that is unmonetized, unaccounted, so that doesn't get into the potential output. That's why I mentioned if the smartest and the fastest way to develop, you enhance your GDP by increasing the female labor force participation by focusing on the allocation and efficiency of time spent in care economy sector. So that's what I mentioned. So in the time of pandemic, the business cycles, if you're using that as an economic analytical framework to frame your policies, then you're going to be the best, because you can take a look into the work by Geeta Gopinath, the IMF, Geeta Gopinath's work on cycle is trend. She mentioned about the context of emerging economies which experience permanent scars in GDP. Like, the drop in GDP we experience right now, that may not be a transient thing. It may be a permanent scar. So we need to understand that the moment we think that it's not a permanent scar, it's a cyclicality, and fiscal and monetary policy, acting as a counter-cyclical policy tool will correct the cyclicality elements, and we get the growth back to the prior pandemic, growth rate, then, we may go wrong. So because, it's an instantaneous firefighting package, and structural reforms also very crucial, These two components we need to look into. And other important aspect is there is normalization procedure that's going to happen. What exactly is a normalization procedure? Whatever we announced as economic stimulus packages, that has to be rolled back after a point of time. Then, public financial management tools like gender budgeting, they are long term. They have got these policy tools got an important role to play the moment, you think about normalization procedure. And I know that the students are aware of the monetary policy and the fiscal policy, economic stimulus packages that is announced in our country. And monetary policy, the predominant tool is the rate of interest. You put a gender lens over there. Cost of credit, that's rate of interest for women, entrepreneurs. Rate of interest, that's a cost of credit that matters, or access to credit. Because if cost of credit is everything, as a part of the new that economic stimulus programs, we decrease the interest rate. Now the repo rate is 4%. If there is monetary mechanisms, that will get translated into the other interest rates by the commercial banks also. But if we look at the credit deployment statistics, there is an uneven access to credit by men and women. And also, you need to look into those aspects of the debate of cost versus access to credit. And digital infrastructure is quite crucial here, because there's a huge digital divide, and even in the education right now. And if there is digital divide and the access of women to digital infrastructure is limited, what exactly are we talking about when we talk about access of women to credit? So these are important things which we need to look into the economic stimulus packages through a gender budgeting lens. Otherwise, the predominant narrative of Indian government to tackle the COVID-related pandemic issues was credit deployment. It was credit-related policies. And, students can take a look into the Stiglitz work. The Nobel laureate Stiglitz and Rashid has written a paper titled, "Which Economic Stimulus Program Works?" And in that paper, they have cautioned that the credit-related economic stimulus programs have limited, multiplier effects. And, that's very true, because the access is very important, because who is accessing the credit? If there is an uneven access to credit, that's a problem. At the same time, if the credit deployment is the predominant process to trigger the economy, then this, it can lead to mounting NPAs, non-performing assets. The moment, there is no corresponding growth in the economy. So a lot of liquidity infusion is happening. That's exactly why 2 days back, RBI has come up with the policy of normalization by absorbing the liquidity from the system by announcing a new policy tool called, that standing deposit rate. What exactly is that? They cannot increase the repo rate right now, the interest rate, because if you increase the interest rate, then, if you bite the bullet, then you cannot have economic recovery process, because rate of interest has to be lower for the investment to be done through cheaper credit. And also the public debt management. If you increase the rate of interest, then your cost of borrowing for the government may go costly, because our deficit and debt is so high. So the public debt management issue. But at the same time, the dilemma is, if you don't increase the rate, inflation, that affects men and women, right? How to tackle this mounting inflation in the economy? And proper gender budgeting packages needs to be designed to address that. Right now, it is the RBI that's a sole mandate to look into the price stability issues. And price stability through the new monetary policy framework, it's only the price stability that needs to be looked into by the RBI. But in the time of pandemic, the sequence of priority was growth first and then inflation containment. But right now, as the inflation is mounting from the global uncertainties through the Ukraine war and, also the Fed Reserve, that's a US center bank, they are going to increase the rate, a series of increase in the rates, the taper tantrum, that's going to happen. So this have got repercussions on Indian economy, because hot money, part of the foreign capital, respond to these interest rate differentials. Where there is high interest rate, your capital will flow to that country. So there is a pressure on RBI to increase the interest rate. And financialization of savings, that's very, very crucial. If you look into the gender perspective also, women have lots of deposit in the banks, because may not be taking risk and putting in equity market or anything. So the moment the interest rate is going down, it affects your financialization of savings. Because look at the interest rate and inflation in our country. It's very sad in the sense inflation is mounting to above comfort zone of 6%. Repo rate is 4%. What does it mean? What is the real rate of interest in India? It's negative. Real rate of interest is nominal rate of interest minus inflation. And if the real rate of interest is negative, what does it mean? The money we put in the bank or the pensions funds, our parents put the money in the pension bonds. They're not even getting what they have deposited, right? So RBI governor has promised that he will look into this matter of zero bound interest rate and the negative interest rates, because it affects financialization of savings, and negative interest rate is a matter of concern. So we have to increase the interest rate, and we have to go hawkish. Hawkish means raising the interest rate, and dovish means keeping it lower. And there is a policy dilemma, because we go dovish for economic recovery process to provide cheap credit, because otherwise loans can go expensive, credit can go expensive. So that's a dilemma. When monetary policy has got this dilemma, fiscal dominance is very crucial to address the human development issues. And within that fiscal policy, within that economic stimulus packages, gender budgeting needs to be given significance and priority to address those human development elements related to government acting as an employer of last resort, government social security programs, government social infrastructure. What exactly is that? In education and health, we need to invest. So that is social infrastructure. So then food security. So these are the important packages where we need to strengthen the gender lens. Otherwise, the growth recovery process will be uneven, and it will be just focusing on the top income quintile of our country. That's the way it's happening. That state business relations is quite okay, but we need to ensure economic growth and development for the people in the lower rung of the pyramid. And there, public financial management tools like gender budgeting has got an important role to play. Dr. Nikita, I stop here and look forward to the questions from the students and faculty members. Then we can make it interactive. Thank you so much. Over to you.